Good morning. This is John Hesse, Cahokia Presbyterian Church. We're studying through the book of Daniel, chapter 5, verses 22 through 31. Glad to have you following along. The title of the message is Judgment, and this is referring, well, actually to two levels of judgment, but specifically a temporal judgment, an earthly judgment. But it of course points to an eternal judgment. Before we read the word, I'd like to go to the Lord in prayer. Father, we thank you so much that you are a God who is full of mercy and compassion, and that you are a God who is full of justice and holiness. And those two are held in tension. And we thank you that you give us the opportunity to respond to your mercy and your compassion before you act in justice and righteousness. And we ask that you would search our hearts as we read your word. We ask that you would strengthen our love for you or bring us to a place of putting our trust in you. In Jesus' name, amen. Daniel 5:22 through 31. Now, the background on this is that Belshazzar, who is the co-ruler of the Babylonian Empire, while his father Nabonidus is taking an extended hunting trip, the enemy army, the Medes and the Persians, are completely surrounding the city, and Belshazzar is so concerned that he's throwing this great big drunken party because he is just absolutely sure that nobody could ever break through the walls. And so he's not the least bit worried. And in the midst of all this drunken revelry, he commands that the vessels, the cups, the saucers that had been dedicated to the Lord in the temple and taken by his grandfather Nebuchadnezzar when Jerusalem was conquered, be brought in so that they could drink toast to the idols of Babylon. And God had had enough. And suddenly Belshazzar sees a hand writing on the wall. And I suspect that he went from being sloppy drunk to sober in about half of a second. Because in the scripture it says that he was so terrified that he couldn't stand. The joints of his hips were loosened and his knees knocked together. And then we're picking up. He asks his wise men, his astrologers and so forth, to read the message. And they're unable to make any sense of it. And his mother, the queen mother, says that there's a man in your kingdom that in the days of your father, speaking of actually her father and Belshazzar's grandfather, wisdom of the holy gods was found in him, speaking of Daniel. And so Belshazzar calls in Daniel to read the message and give the interpretation. And this is a Daniel's response. But you, his son Belshazzar, speaking of Nebuchadnezzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all this, speaking of Nebuchadnezzar's process of humiliation going through a 7-year period of insanity. And you have lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven. They have brought the vessels of his house before you, and you and your lords, your wives and your concubines have drunk wine from them, and you have praised the gods of silver and gold, bronze and iron, wood and stone, which do not see or hear or know. And the God who holds your breath in his hand and owns all your ways, you have not glorified. He's bringing the indictment. This is a lengthier passage, so instead of reading the whole thing first, I'll just read sections and then we'll go back over portions of it. Now in verse 22, Daniel is warning Belshazzar that you have not humbled your heart. God is a God of justice. He always carries out his justice. But there are several scriptural examples of rulers, including Belshazzar's grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar, who eventually humbled his heart and recognized who the true God was. But there are also, sadly, examples of those who did not. In Exodus 10, verse 3, you have the indictment of Pharaoh that he refused to humble his heart and submit to the will of God. And as a result, Egypt, not just Pharaoh, but the entire nation of Egypt, because he was the ruler of Egypt, and the whole nation of Egypt suffered horribly as a result of that arrogance and insolence. In 2 Chronicles 33:23, you have that same judgment against Ammon, the son of Manasseh. I do encourage you to go back and read that on your own. But Ammon was a godless king, and he was the son of a godless king. Manasseh was a godless king. However, at the end of the reign of Manasseh, he had come to a place of trusting in the Lord after decades of ruling as one of the most wicked kings that Israel ever had. But I would like to read from 2 Chronicles 36, 11 through 14, because that also relates to the time span of Belshazzar's grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar. Now, at the time this is speaking of, Nebuchadnezzar had made one invasion into Judah. And they had set up a king to be under the king of Babylon, who was to be basically to submit himself to the king of Babylon, to collect taxes, to organize the people in their work and so forth, to maintain order in the land without having to send a bunch of foreign officials in to do that. And Zedekiah was this king. But in 2 Chronicles 36, 11 through 14, Zedekiah was 21 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. He did evil in the sight of the Lord his God, and did not humble himself before Jeremiah the prophet. And this is during the time of the ministry of Jeremiah. If you read the entire book of Jeremiah, you won't find a single example of anyone who listened to God's message through the ministry of Jeremiah. And Jeremiah was a prophet for at least 30 years, at the very least, because he was a young man when he was called by the Lord. He was an old man when he was carried captive into Babylon with the rest of the captives. But there's no record, at least in the book of Jeremiah, that anybody listened to him. But because he was faithful, his prophecies were recorded for our instruction. Going back to 2 Chronicles 36:13, also he rebelled against King Nebuchadnezzar, who had made him swear an oath by God, but he stiffened his neck and hardened his heart against turning to the Lord his God. Moreover, all the leaders of the priests and the people transgressed more and more, according to all the abominations of the nations, and they defiled the house of the Lord, which he had consecrated in Jerusalem. And so you have sad warnings of those who refused to take advantage of the time that God had given them to humble themselves before his judgment fell upon them. Going on to verse 23, and you have lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven. They have brought the vessels of his house before you. Exodus 49 and 10 gives the instructions of building these vessels for the tabernacle. And then in Numbers 18, 1 through 3, you have further instructions. Numbers chapter 18, verses 1 through 3, when the tabernacle was established in the promised land. Because in Exodus, the tabernacle was still traveling with the children of Israel and their wanderings in the wilderness. In Numbers 18, it was being set up in a semi-permanent location. Now, this was still hundreds of years before the temple was built, but those vessels had been commissioned by the Lord and built for his service prior to that. Numbers 18, 1 through 3. And the Lord said to Aaron, you and your sons and your father's house with you shall bear the iniquity related to the sanctuary. Now, what does he mean when he says you shall bear the iniquity related to the sanctuary? Basically, he's saying that it is your responsibility. And if the things that are dedicated to me in the sanctuary are not treated as holy and dedicated to the Lord, ultimately you will answer for it. If you simply allow them to be treated carelessly or as just common, ordinary things. And you and your sons with you shall bear the iniquity associated with your priesthood. Also bring with you your brethren of the tribe of Levi, the tribe of your father, that they may be joined with you and serve you while you and your sons are with you before the tabernacle of witness. They shall attend to your needs and all the needs of the tabernacle, but they shall not come near the articles of the sanctuary and the altar, lest they die. They and you also. The only ones that God had allowed to handle those were those who were anointed to the priesthood, not their brethren, the Levites. Now, once they were packed, they could carry them in their sacred containers, but they were not allowed to touch them, and the warning was that if they did, they would die. They were to be regarded as that sacred, as that set apart from common use. In Isaiah 52, 11 and 12, and in Hebrews 9, 16 through 22, and I would like to look at that, you have the author of the Hebrews is using the example of the furnishings in the tabernacle as pointing to the sacrifice of Jesus. Hebrews 9, 16 through 22, and I'd like to emphasize verses 21 and 22. For where there is a testament or a covenant, there must also of necessity be the death of the testator. Now, there's a word you don't hear all the time. Probably the only time you're likely to see that word used anymore is the last will and testament. For a testament is in force after men are dead, since it has no power at all while the testator lives. Therefore, not even the first covenant was dedicated without blood. And this is something that the writer of the Hebrew comes back to again and again. He's pointing out what's in the old covenant, that sin requires the death of the sinner or the death of a substitute. Under the old covenant, a spotless animal was offered as a substitute, pointing to the sacrifice of Jesus. For when Moses had spoken every precept to all the people according to the law, he took the blood of calves and goats with water, scarlet wool, and hyssop, and sprinkled both the book itself and the people, saying, This is the blood of the covenant which God has commanded you. Then likewise he sprinkled with blood both the tabernacle and the vessels of the ministry. Now, normally if you're cleaning something, you don't use blood to clean it with. But in this case, they used a mixture of water because it wasn't just to make it look nice and shiny. It was to make it ceremonially clean and pure. It had the blood of the sacrifice. Like when you hear of a preacher speaking of being washed in the blood of the Lamb. Well, normally you don't take a bath in blood to get clean. You would get really dirty and nasty. But it's referring to this old covenant picture that you have, that the blood of Jesus, the blood of the perfect innocent sacrifice, is the blood that cleanses us from the guilt of our own sin. And according to the law, almost all things are purified with blood, and without shedding of blood, there is no remission. So these vessels had been sanctified to God. They'd been set apart for holy use only. And Belshazzar had given the command to bring them in so that everyone could drink toast to their favorite false gods, their favorite idols. Now, there are several strong indictments of the foolishness and futility of idols. And we might say as people, well, we're modern people. We don't worship idols. I mean, which, granted, there probably is no stone or wooden image of something that you bow down to in your house and ask it to help you with your problems. It's highly unlikely that happens. But there are plenty of idols in our lives, things that we trust in, that we hope will solve our problems. It may be our bank account. It may be things that are, many idols that we are tempted to worship and look to for our help are not necessarily bad things. As a matter of fact, they can be wonderful things. They can be great blessings of God. We can trust in our friends. Well, God's given us friends. We can trust in our family. Again, God has given us a family to be a blessing and to be a blessing to them. There's absolutely nothing wrong with those blessings. But when we trust in those things ultimately to meet all of our needs and to take care of every problem that we have, we're looking to the wrong one or the wrong ones. In Psalm 115, verses 5 and 6, and the context is verses 2 through 8, you have a description of the futility of trusting in idols. Psalm 115, 5 and 6. I'm going to start at verse 4. You have a big contrast in verse 3. But our God is in heaven. He does whatever he pleases. We have established that the true God is in heaven, and he does whatever he pleases. There is no one who can stop him. Their idols are silver and gold, the work of men's hands. They have mouths, but they do not speak. Eyes they have, but they do not see. They have ears, but they do not hear. Noses they have, but they do not smell. So, they have all these things that, if they actually function, might be of use. But since they're just lifeless creations, there's nothing they can do to help. Isaiah 37, 16 through 19. Now, in the background of this, Sennacherib, which is an Assyrian general, has come against Jerusalem to besiege it, and he has boasted, saying that none of the gods of any of the other nations that the Assyrians have come up against have saved their people, so how can the God of Israel deliver his people from the might of the Assyrian army? His deadly boast. And he sends a letter to King Hezekiah. And Hezekiah takes the letter to the temple of the Lord and opens the letter and prays to the Lord. O Lord of hosts, God of Israel, the one who dwells between the cherubim, you are God, you alone, of all the kingdoms of the earth. You have made heaven and earth. He is reminding himself. And this is a good thing for us to do when we are tempted to worry about a problem, because when we're tempted to worry about a problem, it looks huge in our eyes. It always does, or we wouldn't worry about it. He is reminding himself of who the God he is worshiping truly is. Incline your ear, O Lord, and hear. Open your eyes, O Lord, and see, and hear all the words of Sennacherib, which he has sent to reproach the living God. And so he's setting up this enormous contrast between the powerlessness of the idols. Truly, Lord, the kings of Assyria had laid waste all the nations in their lands and have cast their gods in the fire, for they were not gods, but the work of men's hands, wood and stone. Therefore, they destroyed them. And then he goes on to ask for God's protection. And as you read, you find that there's this miraculous deliverance that God gives to his people after that. In Habakkuk 2, 18 and 19, this can be a challenging book to find. I believe it's 2 books after Jonah, I think. Or not. Okay. It's right after Nahum, which may not help very much. And right before Zephaniah. Again, that may not be very helpful either. But if you see one of those two, you're close. Okay, Habakkuk 2, verses 18 and 19. And Habakkuk is quoted, he's considered a minor prophet because the little book of Habakkuk is really quite short, and yet it is quoted quite a bit by the New Testament writers. Okay, verses 18 and 19. What profit is the image that its maker should carve it, the molded image, a teacher of lies, that the maker of its mold should trust in it, to make mute idols? Woe to him who says to wood, awake, and to silent stone, arise, it shall teach. Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, yet in it is no breath at all. Okay, reading on. So the indictment against Belshazzar is that he's putting his trust in things that absolutely cannot possibly help him. And he is refusing to humble himself before the true and the living God. They have brought the vessels of his house, and you've praised, reading on, and you've praised the gods of silver and gold, bronze and iron, wood and stone, which do not see or hear or know. And the God who holds your breath in his hands. It's a reminder that our very existence is based on God's mercy. That if God was to withhold his hand of protection from every single human being, we would die in an instant. Acts 17, 24 through 26. Now, Paul here is speaking at the Areopagus in Athens. And while he is there, there are temples and altars to a lot of different idols. And he notices an altar that has been built to the unknown God. So Paul uses this as a starting point to address these Greek philosophers. Paul, in his preaching, he was trained as a Pharisee. And so he was extremely knowledgeable about the law of Moses. And when he would speak to a Jewish audience or those who were familiar with the Old Covenant, he would use that as a starting point. Here he's speaking to Greek philosophers who know nothing or almost nothing about the Old Covenant, and so he starts with what they do know. Acts 17, 24 through 26. I'm going to start at 23. For as I was passing through and considering the objects of your worship, I even found an altar with the inscription, to the unknown God. Therefore, the one whom you worship without knowing, him I proclaim to you. We're going to start with what you do know. God, who made the world and everything in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is he worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, since he gives to all life, breath, and all things. Everything that we have comes from his hand. In Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 25, you have a description of the indictment of God upon us. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because what may be known of God is manifest to them, for God has shown it to them. Paul is not speaking here to those who believe that there's a God because they've read the Old Covenant. They've read the books of Moses. He's saying there are things about God that you can know that you are accountable for simply because of his creation. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they, or we, are without excuse. Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, and birds, and four-footed animals, and creeping things. Therefore God also gave them up to uncleanness, and the lusts of their hearts, to dishonor their bodies among themselves, who exchanged the truth of God for the lie. He says the lie, not just any lie, but the lie. What is the lie? The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. And they worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. And then he goes on to describe the things that follow it. It's a rather horrible indictment of what happens when we believe that lie, when we convince ourselves of the lie that there is no God, that we have no ultimate accounting to give. Then the indictment of the horrible things that happen in our lives and in our society happen as a result of the rest of this chapter. Going back to Daniel, and these are the things that were happening not only in Rome, but in Babylon, and in every culture that has, and in every individual's life that has lived his or her life as though there is no God. These things happen. Reading on. Okay. Then the fingers of the hand were sent from him, and this writing was written. And this is the inscription that was written. And this is why the wise men couldn't understand it. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. Now, mene is from the word mina, which was a unit of money. And tekel is from another unit of money, and upharsin is half of a tekel. So, mina, tekel, and half of a tekel. Okay, that's written on the wall. What in the world? It sounds like something a street vendor would say. That's the price of my good here. This bolt of cloth is going to be 2 minas and a tekel and a half of a tekel. So why is it being written on the wall? Then he gives the interpretation. This is the interpretation of each word. Mene, God has numbered, because mina was to number. Now, unlike our money, the money that most of us is used to, money at that time was based on not what was on the face of the coin. Well, there was no such thing as paper money. But not what was on the face of the coin, but the weight of it, because money was precious metals, gold, silver. Less precious money would have been made out of brass or copper. But still, they're metals that have some intrinsic value. And it was based on the weight of it. God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting or lacking. In Job 31, 2 through 8, you have a description of God weighing us on his scales. It's a depiction of that. In Psalm 62, verse 9, it says, surely men of low degree are a vapor, men of high degree are a lie. If they are weighed on the scales, again, scales were used to measure the value of money, they are altogether lighter than vapor. If you're getting paid in a precious metal, you want there to be quite a bit there. If somebody says, this coin is worth 50 shekels of gold, and you put it on your scale and it doesn't read 50 shekels, you're going to think, this person is misrepresenting it, especially if it weighs a whole lot less. It's only 5 shekels or 2 shekels. So in this case, heavier is better. In Jeremiah 6:27 through 30, the indictment against Israel is that God has called them rejected silver. Now, what was rejected silver? Again, it's that picture of something that has been weighed and misrepresented. Because unscrupulous dealers, if you wanted to create some counterfeit silver, you'd take some copper or some brass, and you'd put just a little bit of, when you would refine silver, there'd be a little bit of silver-colored waste material, and you'd pour that over your copper, your brass, and it'd look pretty good. but it wouldn't weigh like real silver. And so it would be rejected because it would be virtually worthless. It certainly wouldn't be worth the equivalent weight of silver. And so Jeremiah is saying that the people who have continued to reject him and reject his warnings are like rejected silver. Going on to verse 28 in Daniel. Perez, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. And Perez, Upharsin, means half of a Perez, which was a coin. But it sounded very similar to paras, which is the Aramaic word for the Persians. Now, the Medes and the Persians, the two words are used together. This is from secular history. Because they were a confederacy. And a confederacy are two or more nations that have decided to work together, but they maintain their national identity. The most recent example that Americans would have, and certainly not in any of our lifetime, would have been the Confederate States of America, in which each state that was part of it, the difference, say, between the Confederate Army and the United States Army is that the leader of the Georgia Army was not necessarily subservient to the commander-in-chief of the Confederate Army. And part of the challenge that the leader of the Confederate Army in general had was to keep all these, the South Carolina Army might not get along that well with the Georgia Army, and he had to get them to work together, which wasn't always easy to do. Now, in the United States Army, it was a different structure because each state did indeed, Illinois had its own army, and Massachusetts had its own army, but there was a clear chain of command that they were all subject to the commander-in-chief of the Union armies, which toward the end of the war was General Grant. And so it was easier, although there was still friction and personal differences, it was easier to establish a clear line of, okay, this is what you got to do because this is how our chain of command works. So in a confederacy, and the Medes and the Persians were two separate nations that were working together because they recognized that neither one alone could take on the Babylonian Empire. And so they were working together. Now, that confederacy broke down historically after a time and wound up being just the Persians. The Persians conquered the Medes after they'd conquered the other nations. But so that's why those two are together, the Medes and the Persians. The Medes are mentioned in Isaiah 21, verses 1 and 2. And they're also mentioned in Acts 2, verse 9. During the day of Pentecost, you have those who are the descendants of the Medes. They recognize themselves as that. Just as in most any large city, you'll have those who are in neighborhoods that are culturally similar to their home country, whether it be France, Mexico, Russia, China, wherever. You'll have these neighborhoods that reflect that cultural identity. And the Medes maintained a cultural identity even after they had ceased to be an independent nation. Going on. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and they clothed Daniel with purple and put a chain of gold around his neck and made a proclamation concerning him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom, which is what had been promised as a reward. That very night was October 16th, 539 BC. Again, this is something that you can nail down from secular history because the Medes and the Persians wrote down when they made great military conquests. You would expect that to happen. I mean, that's going to be probably one of the first things that they write in their battle dispatch. Hey, we conquered the city on this night. And the way they conquered the city was that the general of those armies diverted the river Euphrates. One of the things that Belshazzar believed that Babylon was unconquerable was because the river Euphrates flowed through the city so that they always had water. And they had large supplies of food. So even though they were surrounded by enemy armies, so what the Medo-Persian general did was he created a temporary dam so that the Euphrates wouldn't flow through, and then he suddenly released it so that it washed out a portion of the wall, because the wall was made out of sun-dried brick, which is totally fireproof, and nothing they had at that time would break it down. But you pour several 100,000 gallons of water against sun-dried brick, all of a sudden there's going to be a great big hole that an army has no trouble marching through. It was done under cover of darkness, so it wasn't seen while that was happening. And by the time the troops that were on the wall were aware of what was going on, it was too late. The enemy was in the city in force. That very night, Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was slain, along with most of those who were with him. And Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. Now this was prophesied in Jeremiah 51, the entire chapter 51, but I would like to read a few verses from that, because you have some very specific prophecies concerning how Babylon would be conquered. Jeremiah 51, I'd like to start at verse 28, but the entire chapter is about that. Oh, I'm on the wrong chapter. Sorry about that. Prepare against her the nations, with the kings of the Medes, its governors, and all its rulers, all the land of its dominion. Again, at the time that Jeremiah gave this prophecy, the Medes were not a mighty nation. And the land will tremble and sorrow, for every purpose of the Lord shall be performed against Babylon, to make the land of Babylon a desolation without inhabitant. The mighty men of Babylon have ceased fighting. They have remained in their strongholds. Their might has failed. They have become like women. They have burned their dwelling places. The bars of her gate are broken. One runner will run to meet another, and one messenger to meet another, to show the king of Babylon his city is taken on all sides. And then in 37 through 44, Babylon shall become a heap, a dwelling place for jackals, and an astonishment, and an hissing, without an inhabitant. They shall roar together like lions. They shall growl like lions' whelps. Again, this is decades before this happened. In their excitement, I will prepare their feasts. I will make them drunk. Now, does this say that God sent a special angel to Belshazzar and said, the thing you ought to do, old Belshazzar, old buddy, old pal, is you ought to go get just as drunk as you can tonight? No, that's not how God worked. But God uses the wickedness of the wicked. I mean, Belshazzar, I'm sure, thought it was his own idea. He probably thought it was a great idea. And so he thought he'd throw this great big party. But God uses the wickedness of the wicked to bring judgment upon themselves, that they may rejoice and sleep a perpetual sleep and not awake, says the Lord. I will bring them down like lambs to the slaughter, like rams with male goats. Verse 42, the sea has come up over Babylon. Not actually the ocean, because they were miles from the ocean. But all of a sudden you have this wall of water from where the Euphrates had been dammed up, bursting against the walls. It would have been like the sea coming against Babylon. She is covered with the multitude of its waves. Her cities are a desolation, a dry land and a wilderness, a land where no one dwells. Again, after the inrush of water, it would have faded pretty fast, because it's largely desert, except for that wall of water that came through suddenly. And then it would have been desert immediately after. Verses 52 through 58, again, more details. Behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, that I will bring judgment on her, carved images, and throughout all her land the wounded shall groan. Although Babylon were to mount up to heaven, though she were to fortify the height of her strength, yet from me plunderers would come to her, says the Lord. The sound of a cry comes from Babylon, great destruction from the land of the Chaldeans, because the Lord is plundering Babylon and silencing her loud voice. And then it goes on to give further details of the destruction of Babylon because of their refusal to heed the warnings, first of Jeremiah and then later of Daniel. And there were probably others in between, but in all these cases. Now, what was Belshazzar's fatal mistake? Well, you could say there were several fatal mistakes. One was his arrogance, to be sure. But as it said, he refused to humble himself. There were other rulers in Scripture who were equally wicked. Ahab being one, Manasseh being one, equally wicked. And yet, at the end of their lives, when they are confronted with the certainty of God's judgment, a pagan king, the king of Nineveh, during the time of the prophecy of Jonah. I mean, the king of Nineveh had no reason at all to believe in the God of Israel, except this guy shows up who smells like fish, and he's been in the belly of a large fish for 3 days, and you could probably tell that from 30 or 40 yards away. He's been in the belly of a large fish for 3 days. You probably didn't have to check very closely. And he comes up with this story that Nineveh will be destroyed, and of all things, the king of Nineveh, in his arrogance and his pride, he repents, and God spares that city. And God spared Ahab for a time, and God spared Manasseh. God's desire when he proclaims judgment is not that we say, well, God's going to judge me anyway, so I'll just go away and get every little bit of pleasure out of this that I can and just go blindly into judgment. God's desire is for them and for us, when we receive that message, to humble ourselves, to recognize that he is God, to recognize that we will give an account. And in his mercy, he gives us that opportunity. Amen. Father, we thank you so much for your word. We thank you that your word gives us correction. We thank you that your word gives us encouragement. We thank you that your word gives us all that we need in order to come to you and to respond in the knowledge of your justice and in the offer of your compassion. And we ask that you would work in the hearts of all who hear, that they would respond to your grace. In Jesus' name, amen. And thank you very much. God bless you.